Scott, thank you so much for joining me on Success Stories. This podcast is all about showing agents what's possible. And one of the things I really like to showcase is that 0 to 1 process. So if we look at the amount of homes you sell, your volume, somewhat overwhelming for a newer agent, but I want to showcase the backstory, how you got there, the steps you took, and especially since your story is a little bit unconventional in the residential real estate industry. So I want to jump right into it. Thanks for being here with me, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I always like to say, start wherever feels like the starting place of the story, whether it's you're getting into real estate, or if you want to start how you transition into real estate. Tell me any part of the story you want to start at.
Yeah, for me, had been around construction for a long time. So framed houses, flipped them, worked on them, had been in construction a lot. And I remember one day was in a house that we were working on, and some real estate agents rolled in. One of them was a good friend of mine. And I watched them walk through the house that we were working on, and it planted the thought in my mind, someday I'm probably not going to want to be out in the cold and the hot and the whatever. We're going to hammer working on these things. I was like, that seems like a sweet gig to sell them. And really, honestly, that kind of planted the thought where I was like, man, like come the time that I'm not really interested in manual labor anymore, this seems like a good way to go. So that was the concept. And then I started working towards getting my license. And from there, really just just wanted to help people. I think it's pretty common. People, get into real estate because they do want to help and they have that heart, which is awesome. I think that's what makes the industry really special. And so I began to think through the process, and I was like, okay, once I got my feet wet, I really began the transition of thinking, okay, what if my mom was, buying her house? What if my sister? What if my brother? If they were in real estate, how would I treat them? And that's pretty much kind of began to frame how I thought about real estate, how I really wanted to treat people, because I saw there's a lot of mess out there, in the industry, and I'm sure that happens in any industry. You can see the ugly side of things. I was like, man, I just want to be a part of real estate done honestly, with integrity, and done well, where people can walk away from a transaction like that was great. And I appreciated that. There was value brought, and I felt like somebody cared about me, and they weren't just commission checking.
Well, I think the interesting part about real estate, going from a job, is that this is a quote I've said for a very long time: is nobody cares if you have enough food to eat, right? Because no one's paying you by the hour. So
Yeah.
checking in on you that you're doing your daily activities. So walk me through that very first process. Did you join a team? Did you go work for a builder? There's so many paths into the real estate industry.
Yeah.
I'm a proponent of going on a team, or going and working for a developer or a builder or an investor, just because there's a lot of guidance, right? And I feel like those experiences compress time versus going at it alone. So tell me how your process was.
Yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely. So I just moved to a brand new area. I knew nobody, starting from scratch. And so I was with a different firm at that time, but joined a team. It was a pretty high functioning team. And I came on as the grunt, basically jumped on calls, learned how to talk to people, got over the fear of just jumping in and having conversations. And then was a buyer specialist predominantly. And so I was able to be involved. And I think we did like 60 or 70 transactions that first year. So for agents starting, I was drinking from a fire hose, but it was amazing because I got to learn lending practices. North Carolina is a law firm state, so we don't work with title companies. So I got to learn the law firm side of things. Saw a ton of home inspections, which, was easy to jump into that side because I knew houses pretty well. But that really gave me the footing and the foundation because of the volume that the team did. And it was not sustainable long-term for me in the lifestyle that I needed, because it was a bit of a hamster wheel. By the time to give, chunks of commissions to, the firm and then the team, and all those things broke down, pay your tax, that sort of thing. You have to do a lot of volume. And so I knew I wouldn't want to do that long-term, just for like a life and family and kids, but it was 100% the platform that I was able to build off, which pretty much launched the rest of my career, put me in contact with everybody I needed to know. And then I had a great transaction coordinator who was a part of that team. And she had been in the industry forever. She had been a mortgage broker for decades, and she knew transactions super well. And I just found myself in her office, talking through our transactions, asking questions. How did you do that? Why'd you send that email? What leverage points did you use during our due diligence process? All those sorts of things. And she really taught me the tricks of the trade, and all the background. And so that was a huge launching point for me to even have the confidence 2.5 years later to step out on my own.
And so what was that kind of pivotal decision moment that significantly kind of accelerated your process? Talk to me through that moment. Because again, whether it's 2 years in, 5 years in, I'm fascinated with the mental frame of like what changed? What was that moment where you decided to go a different way?
Well, the structure for our team was unique, and so I had been proposing changes along the way that I thought would help with agent retention. And some of them clicked and some of them didn't. And so it really kind of came to a point where I was having to make a decision, like, what do I want to do with my time, family, life, kids, the whole thing? And like, is this really going to fit? And honestly, I wanted to stay with that team long term. The reward was great. The risk was on the low side for me, having to take a lot of that financial, lead sourcing and had all that just to jump out on my own, but it just didn't fit. So where the team wanted to go forward, they were, it just, the gears didn't line up, I guess, basically. So it pushed me essentially out of the nest, if we want to look at it that way. And so it's like, I got kicked out of the nest. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to go figure out how to survive on my own. Now, the good news is it was way easier than I thought. so, so the
After
fear,
2.5 years of high volume experience.
that's true. That's true. That's true. But it wasn't as scary as initially as I thought it was going to be. And once I got into it, I was like, you know what? It's so similar, and just focusing on providing value to people, sticking around, and having a couple years under the belt at that volume gave me the ability to connect with a lot of people. And so that platform I initially didn't have, coming into a brand new area, knowing nobody, starting from scratch, gave me a bit of a platform to launch from, and a good knowledge base. That it really came down to the family and time, and the lifestyle that we were looking for, and not being quite tied to that hamster wheel.
So one of the reasons I was excited to interview you is your business is a little bit different than the average realtors. Talk to me about what you focus on. How do you generate leads? Tell us about your whole business.
Yeah. So what happened is I met one investor along the way, and actually, to be true to the situation, they were on the very front side of figuring out how to get into real estate. So we helped them sell their house and had a great connection with them and their families we went through. And they mentioned at the closing table that they wanted to get into investing potentially at some point. And like, we're looking for real estate initiatives, things that we can do to be involved in the real estate market, but they didn't know where to start. And so once I made that choice to get out on my own, I was thinking, hey, okay, how can I, number one, get in contact with the people that I've been working with in the past and let them know? And then two, how can I start looking for repeat business? And in real estate, in my mind, I was like, okay, that could be as passive as income as could find. So I'm thinking, if I can find someone who's going to do multiple transactions in a year, that's a gold mine for me. And so I reached back out to this family and I said, hey, you mentioned this back in the day. Would you potentially be interested in us figuring out how to do this? Like, I know a lot of construction stuff. I can help kind of get us connected. What if you thought about flipping a house? Have you ever kicked that idea around? And so they'd kind of considered it. And then they decided to jump in. So I bought them their first house. So we went and found, a major fixer upper and got them connected, flipped that first house. But I think we did a couple that year. And then I began to really focus on that side.
Pause right there because their story is amazing, but you're kind of skipping over some like tactical stuff because I really want to unpack for people like the how to.
Yeah.
Right? So again, you and I could probably hang out all day and talk because I had a very similar journey. Investors were my jam.
Yeah.
Where did you help source the properties? Did they find them? What part of the value proposition did you add to? Let's unpack.
Yeah, that's great. I can dig into that a little bit. So yeah, that's great. So I would say if somebody knows the average selling price of a home, they've got to build in the margin. And so you can have to find a property that's, at least $100,000 below average resale value. If there's more, great. If there's a little less, you just have to figure out what those numbers are. So if you have an average 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and that could go by neighborhood or area, of course, but like if you set those up case specific, and then as an agent, you've got to go out and find if that's practical, so fine. the location, what you know that's going to sell for after repair value, ARV, and then, come on the other side and then propose to your client, hey, I found a house that is significantly undervalued. It needs a ton of work. And then basically, if you can get them to close that gap with the repairs, walk them through that process. So I gotten to know several handymen. And then I also had some skills myself. So we got into that. We did a little bit of a tag team together, got them off the ground. And then so we obviously had to build in enough room for commissions and closing costs. You walk all that through, kind of itemize what their closings are going to be. And then as long as they could make, at that point, that family was comfortable with me. Hey, if we jump in, we do that work and we can make 20 grand, we're happy. And so that's a place where like your individual client, they're going to be comfortable with different margins and what they're looking for. So their baseline was if we have at least 10, we're okay because it's worth the time of investment. 20 is ideal. 20 up is even better. And so then we started targeting us.
And so a couple of things I want to cover there. One is, I think what you just said is probably one of the most important lessons people can take from that. When it comes to investing, a lot of people will say, let me know if you see a good deal, right? Like if you're at a cocktail party, if you tell people you're in real estate, it'll come up. Hey, do you deal with investors?
Yeah.
Do you do deals? And I always tell people and agents specifically that you should always ask for them to define what a deal is, right? Because for somebody else, 10 or 20K is not worth getting out of bed in the morning. But for somebody else, like you just described, it's perfectly in their sweet spot. I have a story I like to tell folks where over a couple year period, I sold one family, 17 properties, ranging between an average price point of $500,000 to $600,000.
Yeah.
And they would tear them down and they would build new and they would rent them out. And when I did the math between the acquisition and the cost of construction, it was like a 2% cash on cash rate of return. Like I would never do that. You probably would never do that. But it was actually his wealth transfer strategy to his family. He had he had a younger wife than himself. And he was actually very worried about some health stuff. He had survived a heart attack.
Yeah.
And he had a very complicated business, but it produced a lot of cash. And he was always worried about the family taking it over. So what he did was fantastic part of town, built brand new, high end. And he ended up we lived in the DC area, and he ended up getting a lot of diplomats and families that came for the foreign service. And so, it was a guaranteed check, like on the first. It was like a direct transfer from the embassies. And his concept was like, hey, you don't understand. This is wealth transfer for me, right? Yeah. And why I tell that story when we're talking about investors is because it's so interesting when you're like, well, like I would never touch a property that wasn't at least, 1% cash on cash if we were cash flowing, or at least a 65, 70% ARV minus repair cost was my personal sweet spot. And over the years, I tried in all high income, low income, blue collar, white collar, the whole thing. Section 8, non-section 8. I have the seminar on personally trying most things. But the reality that I've learned, there's no right or wrong, and it's your personal journey. So you understanding what they're comfortable with doesn't make it a good deal, doesn't make it a bad deal, just makes a deal they're willing to do.
Yep. Yeah. And to that point, they did a lot of the work themselves when they first started. And so, they were rolling up their sleeves. They were excited about it. It's something their family wanted to do. They got their little boys involved, that sort of thing. And then, so that obviously gave them more of an ability to have the labor on their own hands, if that makes sense. And then as they started to scale, we started to do more deals per year and started to hire that out. And obviously those numbers changed to really dial those things in. So yeah, it's a fair point.
And what part of Western Carolinas do you work?
Yeah, we're Western North Carolina, around the Asheville, North Carolina area. And we work right around pretty much 5 counties surrounding the Asheville area. So yeah.
And in a given year, how many properties will you help families sell?
Well, so this is a little bit farther down the road now, so I can answer that question, but that has all to do with the builder that I work with now. So
yeah, then tell me the transition. So you went from helping that one family to doing a couple deals. Where to go from there?
Yep. So funny thing is that I was working with a guy. I came up from Florida. I helped him and his family buy property here, and he mentioned, just to kind of drop that little thing at the closing table again, I'd love to get into real estate somehow, some way, investing. It's like a light bulb went off again. I was like, all right, his name was Dave. And I was like, Dave, let's go to lunch, sometime next week. And I just did the same thing with them. And I was like, I can help you find, flip properties at this point. I've kind of got my toes in the water with this other couple. It's going well. Here's how we've done, kind of explain the whole thing to him. And then, like you just said, we kind of came up with numbers that made sense for him. Looked pretty similar at that point. And then so I just started, shooting those over each one of them. And I started picking them up. And then by the time oh man, probably a year and a half went by. I think I had 4 or 5 people that I had worked with that said, I'm interested, quote unquote. And then we just kind of role played that scenario. Some of them never jumped in, but by the time I had 4 or 5, the real estate market started to change and our average, price per home started to go up and up and up and up. And what we found was, and for anybody out there who might be listening to this, if you're in a similar situation, this would be an amazing takeaway because we fell backwards into it. But I would highly suggest, paying attention to the shift. So we couldn't find dilapidated properties that we had margin anymore because people were willing to do that work themselves. And so they're like, man, I don't want to buy, I can't afford a $500,000 home. I'll buy this $300,000 home and I'll fix it myself. And so those prices on our dilapidated properties and our renovation properties started rising. And so we really had no room anymore. Our margin shrunk in about 6 months because all those properties now are being purchased, not sitting on the market and willing to take low offers. And so all my investors are starting to think, man, the opportunity is drying up. What are we supposed to do? About the same time, I ran into a guy who was doing some spec homes, and his name is Jonathan. And in conversations with him, I realized I've got investors with money and capital that they're wanting to invest, but we don't have renovation properties to work on. Our numbers just don't work anymore. And he was looking for people to invest in some spec homes, and that would truly be passive income for these investors because they're not swinging hammers anymore. And so then I sat down with Jonathan and a couple of these investors, had a lunch at a pizza joint in downtown Asheville. And we said, okay, what does it look like for these investors to stop swinging hammers and flipping houses and buying land and then contract with you to build a spec house? And it was a whole different model, whole different thing. And they were a little, a couple of them were a little leery, maybe of like, well, I don't know, maybe we'll do one. We'll see how it goes, sort of thing. And it went fine. And so then the strategy went from not looking for dilapidated properties. It was a transition to how do we get flag lots? How do we buy 2 lots and split them and build, 2 for the price of 1, essentially? So then we became creative on tracking down land and trying to get those investors to purchase land to then contract with the builder to sell the spec house, so which kind of put me in the middle of all those transactions. But that was a fun process as well. And that was when land was a little bit sleepy. Man, maybe for any agents that like, even if you are flipping houses, I would suggest thinking creatively about finding a builder that you can connect your investors with to pick up those extra flag lots in town that are sitting around, or buy the difficult property that's hard to build on and get the builder to build it and kind of plug your investors in that way. Because honestly, if we were able to do both of those at the same time, that would have been really fun. We focused solely on one, we're forced into the other, and I never had really thought in that train of thought before about the spec home. So I would suggest that as a great option for
So,
people.
so if you don't mind my commentary, because I'm smiling because
Yeah,
I've
please
done
do.
all the stuff you've said, and
That's
one
great.
thing I'm hearing you say, Scott, for anyone listening, is you've been able to adapt quickly, right? So
Mm,
I grew up in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, the DMV, but I've actually I like Asheville a lot. We went twice last summer. We looked at land,
great.
spent a week with the whole family there, um, and so I randomly researched a lot about Asheville last summer. And so Asheville is this pretty cool part in Western North Carolina for anyone listening, that
Yeah.
exploded in the last couple of years. Um, there's a lot of people from Miami that come up to Asheville. Your food
Yeah.
scene is out of this world. But what I've witnessed in my research, it's like it exploded, then it got oversaturated by second home, um, Airbnb
Uh-huh.
folks, and what you're probably having to maneuver, and you've maneuvered well, is seeing trends, right? So one of the things I always like to say, marketers ruin everything, right? So like anytime business finds an asymmetric return, meaning for this level of effort, I get this much return.
Yeah.
Eventually, eventually everyone else finds out, whether it's the consumer themselves going, hey, that's an opportunity, right? I don't want to
Yeah.
buy for 500. I want to buy for 300. I'll do the work with myself.
Yep.
Whether it's someone making, I saw a video on tiny homes in Asheville, and it was like 30% return. And within like 18 months, a lot of people tried the same thing and saturated the
Sure.
market, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens as an investor, who's someone who worked with investors for 16 years, it's like this part of town would get hot and then it would get oversaturated. Then this part of town would get
Well,
hot and it would get oversaturated. And this niche would get, was overperforming and then it would get saturated, meaning whether it's restoring older homes, whether it's entitling property and building from scratch, whether it's and again, I've seen it. And the fascinating and interesting part is making sure that you can see the trends coming, right? Whether it's
sure.
and again, with investing, unlike other things, you have to be able to survive the timeline, right? One thing is being in and out of a rehab that's painting carpet. Another one is, full gut reno. And another one is like rezoning. You said find that like difficult lot to build on and, either whether it's by right or by a rezoning or a spot amendment, and not getting stuck with it. So talk me through some of those transitions you've seen and even like if you want to share one that you're witnessing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, so the place that we're in, and this, I think will begin to even answer part of that question by nature, is what happened to Asheville and what's still going on is builders are building semi-custom and custom homes. And so our average price point in the Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is, hovers kind of somewhere between 500 and 600,000. That's just average, price to a home. And so when you look at that and on up, that's where a lot of new construction is focusing. So most of our new construction is that 5, 6, 7. And of course, you can get up in the millions, multi-millions if you want to, but I think on average, a lot of our new construction has come in right in that 700,000-800,000 mark. Really cool homes, green built, there's a lot of cool, funky stuff that's in Asheville. And we got crazy roof lines and weird building materials, and people love it. It's kind of what makes Asheville. So what Jonathan, the 2020 builders did, as I partnered with him, is he said, well, I want to build a recession-proof house. He had been through the recession of, 07, 08, 09, and that's in that place. Really loving Western North Carolina and understanding that a lot of our service industry and people who were kind of born, raised, live, the workaday people of Western North Carolina are being priced out. It's almost like you look at, there's tons of markets that have kind of done that. But I think of like a Boulder, Colorado, is kind of like the go-to for me, where it's like, okay, the people who probably back in the day used to live, work, and that was home, all those got pushed out because everybody else came in. So you mentioned Miami, we've got Connecticut, people coming from the Northeast and everything. So there's a lot of money that's coming to Asheville. And the people who have been here forever have a hard time living here and working here and staying here. So their houses have increased astronomically in value, but they can't sell to cash in because they can't afford to buy in our same market. And so what we decided to do, on Jonathan's leading with 2020 Builders, is to build attainable housing. So we right now are putting ourselves kind of in a difficult place because we're not building highest and best use on that land, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. And again, by the way,
Yep.
not to digress, remember that thought process, but my ADD goes everywhere. So I did foreclosures during the financial crisis, and we're systemically short 5 million homes in this country. Part of it is the regulatory complexity at the municipal level, right? So like, I bet you, whether it's the Carolinas, Virginia, Florida, you and I could go all over this country, find a lot and find a product you and I can build that pencils. But what screws it up is impact fees and tap fees and all these municipal fees, where the only way it makes sense is to build at 1.2, and you can't deliver that entry level $400,000 product that we need in this country. But that's just me being a nerd about the rules of the data.
There's been a lot of conversation here, and the city of Asheville's done some things with ADUs and accessibility and what are they going to allow to kind of do to some of those things. Yeah, so that's been a hot topic here for us as well. So the niche that we have put ourselves in to do something unique and try to set ourselves apart is to build that attainable house. And so that is it was very sustainable in Buncombe County for a long time, right in where Asheville is. And then as the time has gone on, we've had to push out to the surrounding counties. So now we're going kind of 5 county area around, and we've had to discover new markets for ourselves, basically. And we have, as Jim Collins says, don't load up a cannonball and fire one. So we've fired bullets into small areas. Okay, well, let's pick up one, like first house out in this county. We've never built it before. Let's just see how it goes, kind of some R&D, and finding that, the market's responded well and we're okay there. And then really buying in. And so as we've evolved, everything has moved into spec home building for my business. And that's kind of where it landed in this kind of non-traditional place. So now I work as the head of sales for 2020 Builders, and that's all and we just brought on a new agent. He just joined EXP here recently, and he's doing all of our land acquisition. So everything that we focused on now is finding land that we can build attainable housing on. And then we sell those spec houses at the end. And we branched out. It's probably about 45-minute to an hour radius from Asheville is really where we focus now.
And walk me through how that thought process went. So are you still doing any resale, and are you referring it out? Are you monetizing those? If not, you're not going to have a coaching call after this, because that's a incredible
So
way to.
that's our next hire is going to be somebody else to join our sales team and build that out to about 4 people. And so right now we don't have a lot of focus on reselling our original product. And so there's loss on that in terms of
Well,
like
I'm not
getting
even
that
talking
route.
about your resale product. When someone
Okay.
walks, they have to sell something in order to buy your place, right? There should be a funnel. And that's what I love about this company is like look up the Andrew Franklin team out of Houston. Uh,
Okay.
they basically represent builders, and their biggest thing is they help the buyer coming in who has a house to sell. So
Right.
they're with the funnel you have this amazing way to monetize additional opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's not something we've tapped into particularly. Most of our people are coming fresh out of the area and they're looking to move. And then a few of that is, I'd say actually probably predominantly for people who are out in the area are getting out of a rental. And so one of the big things that we're trying to help people do is own their future is that's kind of just how we talk about it. We want to build houses and help people own their future. And so getting out of a rental situation, finding that first home, we're able to set ourselves apart because they're not buying, at all, honestly, a pretty junky house for a similar price in our area where they can find new construction. So what we're trying to do is make that an easy choice, apples to apples. Why would I not buy a new construction home for a similar price compared to, let's say like a 1960s or 70s rundown?
And have you partnered with a lender so you guys can be aggressive and creative with the 30-year fixed interest rate like some of the larger production builders are doing?
So we're not quite at that volume where we can tap into that completely, but we do have a lender here who's partnered with us, and she offers incentives and the company offers incentives. So in a similar style way, we're able to offer, it's an easy task, the product. And that's, we advertise that uh, straight through her to say, yeah, if you use with Atlantic Bay our systems, this is going to go well and you get these credits at closing.
Because one of the interesting things, and for context, if someone's watching this years later, it's mid 2025. We're in a high interest rate environment. Builders are being very creative because they can use incentives to,
Yep.
be 100, 150 basis points below average rates, and that makes a significant difference in the life of the loan.
Absolutely does. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love for us to get into some builder financing if possible. Our volume isn't quite at the place where we can compete with nationwide builders, but it's definitely a road we're trying to figure out how to navigate.
So, Scott, where is the next opportunity you see? One very constant thread I've enjoyed about this conversation is how you continue to evolve based on the market and your skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're struggling to find land in Asheville because prices are getting so high that you have to basically build that $600 to $1 million home to make it worth it. And so we've pushed out number one. And actually, it's kind of cool because just over the weekend, right before our call started here, we went under contract on our first parcel in Tennessee. So we just went up over the border. So we're moving states and we're going to go north into the Tri-Cities area. And we're going to begin building spec houses there. So we're going to pursue that. we're considering potentially going over to Charlotte. But it seems like we've got a lot of nationwide builders there that just, it's a market that's hard for us to compete with at that scale. So the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, Elizabethton, Bristol area, Greenville, that's kind of where we're settling. So that's our next move for adaptability, is crossing state lines and beginning to move there as well.
Well, shameless plug. That's why our brokerage is awesome, right? We're completely
That's
borderless.
right.
You can jump any border you want as long as you're licensed there or have a referral partner that can service that for you.
That is the exact plug to put there, because I actually moved out of, so I was in an original firm, had a mid-level firm, let's say, between times. And the reason that we left is when I took the head of sales position, we knew at some point we were going to start to go nationwide, and that brokerage could not transfer with me. And we didn't want them to be chasing us. We wanted the freedom to go wherever we needed to go. And that's why we joined EXP. So, got a cool story there.
Well, that's probably the perfect place to end. Scott, thank you so much for joining me. If you want to share where folks can find you, if they want to send referrals to you or partner with you, just, let them know where to find you. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Best email is scott@2020builders.net. And then anything related to us would just be 2020builders.com. They can find us there in the area. We'd be happy to help.